Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Grateful.
Yes.
I'm excited. We had a little bit of a brief interaction yesterday about where this might go, just related with some recent popular culture. So, and I think I was like, don't even talk to me about it. I just want it to be fresh.
Yeah.
And I want an unbiased perspective from Laura Ezell.
Yeah.
So as we dive in,
Okay.
just if you don't mind introducing yourself and telling us what you do for work here at Cumberland Heights Foundation.
Sure. I've done a lot of things for work at the Cumberland Heights Foundation, but for the last 4 years, I have been working in the adolescent recovery of Cumberland Heights ARCH program. And
It's 4 years, huh? 4 years?
I think I'm coming up on 5. Yeah. No, 4. Yeah. And then, it's been on and off for like 13 years. So I think my original hire was in 2011, which is a long time ago. But I worked in the women's program, men's program, professionals program, and now the adolescents. So, yeah.
You've been around. You know how to submit a purchase order.
I do.
Among many other things.
Many other, and pinpoint.
Who to call outside of a written policy when something happens.
Yeah.
Totally.
But my role right now is I have a few different hats, but I'm in missions, outreach, and business development for our adolescent services. And so my primary task is really responding to parents in crisis or providers in crisis who are working with teens in the community and beyond, and trying to listen to what's going on with them and then respond with helpful resources. And sometimes that means connecting them with us, and sometimes it doesn't. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So on any given week, what's a day in your life and your role look like?
It's like juggling a lot of a lot of tasks. We offer assessments as part of the process of kind of trying to determine if a kid is right for our services. And so, sometimes that means just virtually meeting with a kid and trying to assess their strengths and some of the risks that are involved in their behaviors, communicating that back to parents and kind of giving them some helpful guidance about what are some supports you can put in place for this kid. Sometimes it's pretty clear that they are in a state of severity and really need a structured, supportive environment to be successful. And sometimes it's more nuanced. Sometimes it's not as clear what might be, kind of the path forward. As you and I both know, there's a lot of ways to find recovery and to define it for yourself. So I'm kind of helping them navigate those options.
Yeah, in that age, adolescence from, I believe, 14 to 17?
Yep.
For the ARCH program in particular. Is a tricky time.
Incredibly.
Developmentally.
Yes.
And especially as related to the root of recovery or the etiology, when you start use behaviors, whether that's 10 or 12 or 13 or 15 or 17 or 18 or however old you are, and it's challenging. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today, based on your experience, is the first question is, what have you learned in adolescent treatment that otherwise is different or the same than adults? Just curious about that.
And I should also just kind of qualify myself, because I was an adolescent in a structured setting. So my experience, now is very much also a part of my whole journey and experience as someone who received care as a kid that was not adequate, that was, misguided, traumatizing, abusive, so there was a lot of hesitance for me about working with adolescents because of my own experiences. And it took, kind of, my healing that part of my journey to really move into how I get to kind of transform that pain into purpose now and really do it better for kids and families than what I received. And so that's kind of what drove me to come into Arch, was wanting to be a part of that solution. Like, from the inside, working in a residential treatment center, like, what are the characteristics of a program that is doing this right? Because I know a lot of the characteristics of what isn't.
That's exactly what I was going to ask next, is what are the characteristics? Could sum that into a question, describe what Arch does, as simply as possible. But I like yours better. What are those tactile functions or characteristics that makes a good residential adolescent treatment program, whether it's maybe addiction or otherwise?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard when you're a parent and your kid, and you're like watching your kid take crazy risks and kind of devolve and be unstable. It's really easy to be taken advantage of because you're in such a state of crisis. So I think everybody kind of needs to know what to look for in facilities, because they are not all the same. No. It's kind of like, I mean, you're a little bit of a systems theorist, and I really kind of look for those kind of themes too. Of any system can become toxic. Any system can be corrupt. So what are the things that we can actively do to make sure that we're not becoming corrupt? So I think things like, in a healthy system, it is a place where I get my needs met, right? Like basic safety needs. A healthy system is one that's adaptable, is one where I can disagree and challenge and still be respected. So those are some of the characteristics of a healthy system. I do think that when it comes to the treatment industry, we have to be cautious about greed and our egos and some of the kind of human, psychological constructs that we all suffer from, that even really well-intended people can do harm if they are not, if there aren't a system of checks and balances against some of these features. So, yeah. So one thing is, you and I have the privilege of working for a not-for-profit, which means that you and I know all the money that we are making is going back into providing more services and more care. But that is not the case for every facility. Some facilities are a private facility where you are kind of making someone wealthy in the process of getting treated. And so there's an extra measure of accountability that needs to be had to make sure that greed is not corrupting that system.
That's interesting.
You know what I mean? So what kind of incentives do your admissions staff get for bringing in people into care? Because if they get financial incentives to do that, then what's the likelihood that their integrity is compromised and they're bringing kids in that aren't necessarily right for their services? It just, so you have to create balances and check systems for those.
It can be challenging.
Yeah.
It can. What I hear you saying more than anything else is, even a great program can have a bad day. So what does that really mean? What do I really mean? You could be a nonprofit. You could be accredited.
Yes.
We could talk about what that means maybe if we see fit. You could be fully staffed and overstaffed to the guidelines outlined in your state, because we do have rules and regulations associated with the licenses that we have at each one of our service locations, inclusive of the Arch Academy location. We could With all of those things considered, a CA or a milieu staff management, a frontline staff person who's responsible for the well-being of these kids in any given day, or a counselor or a case manager could experience transference or something else is going on in their life. Who cares what the excuse is, but they could make a poor decision that's going to negatively impact a kid in our care. So it's a higher responsibility. And you're right, your organization needs to have really good feedback loops.
Yes.
You know, whether that's financial or performance or culture, in order for folks at all levels of the organization to feel heard, seen, and safe to, because sometimes we need to really watch out for this is, you know, can someone speak up if they see something that they interpret as incorrect or invalid? And who can they speak to, and is there reliability that message will be heard?
Yes.
You know, but I agree with you. You know, even quote good programs can make mistakes and have a bad day.
Yeah.
This seems in particularly interesting. So before we move on, the characteristics of a good program, though, to be sure, like for anybody that might be making a treatment decision, is the financial status of the organization, which if you're a nonprofit, you can look that information up online. It's publicly available, usually 2 years back. Are they accredited?
Yes.
By a reputable national accreditor associated with that space. So in behavioral health, one of the gold standards is the Joint Commission. Do they have state licensure? That's always like super important to check for. Because to do this work, if you identify yourself as a especially for addiction treatment, as an addiction treatment provider, you have to have a license for that. The other thing that I might look for, Laura, I'd be curious what you think about this, is are they in network with an insurance company?
I mean, that's
because
that's part of it, I think, is that with the growing support that we have had in the mental health field from insurance and the collaboration between addiction specialists, like in our line of work, we're dealing with primary substance use disorders and, you know, common co-occurring issues. But even if I'm just a primary mental health focus, there's criteria. And so we've had better communication between providers and insurance. ASAM, which is the, you know, kind of medical criteria for determining level of care. You know, those kinds of systems also provide a checks and balances. We have to prove our clinical hours to the insurance in order to get reimbursement. ARCH deals with a lot of insurance-dependent families. And so, that is kind of some built-in protections. But that's not to say that there aren't some private facilities that aren't in network that are also not, you know, doing good work.
No doubt.
But it is kind of it's a little bit of a flag for me when someone's like, yeah, no, we're not going to contract with insurance anymore. Because, you know, then I'm kind of like, well, why?
Exactly.
You know, what are you wanting to avoid?
Because it's work.
Yeah, because it's work. Yes. And it's, there's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of, you know, when we do these reviews with our kids, the insurance companies and we are both talking about their progress and their internalization of the skills we're teaching them, which is like a totally intangible thing. You know, it's like, how do we know that they're internalizing these skills? And so we have treatment goals that they're a part of designing. You know, that's kind of another thing, is like, how is your teen program engaging your teen in collaborating on the treatment plan? If I have like a system of treatment that just dictates care to a kid and says, this is the measure we want you to meet, then my program is designed for compliance, not for collaboration. And, you know, kids are kind of they're already really disempowered in their lives because they're minors. And so you have to take extra care to make sure that you have a way to engage them in the treatment process and help like allow them to shape their treatment goals. And like you said earlier, kind of like feedback of, you know, hey, this approach doesn't work for me. And then it's up to you as the treatment team to find a model that works for that kid, not the other way around. You know, so I think that those are important features.
Very systems of you.
Yeah.
You know, never forget an old professor of mine used to say that there's no such thing as an unwilling client.
Yeah.
You know, we just haven't figured out the combination of therapies or treatments that might help them. And I was like,
That's right.
oh, yeah. So when I think about our programs, oftentimes we're reminding ourselves in the meetings that I sit in that we should expect people to act associated to their experience. In other words, hey, when you stopped using drugs or alcohol 5 days ago, you know, and you say something sideways to a nurse or a counselor, or you don't show up for group on time or whatever it might be, that we need to take those opportunities as clinical experiences to help them learn new skills associated with whatever it might be associated with the issue. But it's just funny sometimes where we expect everybody to be on their best behavior.
Right.
We lose sight of like, well, yesterday this person might have been homeless, you know? So when you think about, gosh, I just want to dive straight into the deep end a little bit.
Okay.
What does Arch do when a kid does act out, and let me be more specific, maybe break milieu rules, break rules associated with the program, defiant behavior, disruptive behavior with other kids and staff members over a long period of time? How do y'all handle that? How do y'all talk about it? How does your culture help those kids?
Yeah, so I think over a length of time is also something that we should probably define a little bit, because there are programs that are very, very lengthy years.
Yeah, so start with describing Arch,
Sure,
so people get a context of what we do.
Yes. So Arch is a primary substance use treatment facility, and we also are treating common co-occurring issues alongside that. So it's kind of like, I tell this to parents a lot, like you're kind of like, your kid is using drugs to get from point A to point B. So like that's the car, but the driver is often things like depression, or you have like anxiety and, riding in the back seat and like low self-worth kind of by the window, so it's like you have to stop the car and then, get everybody out so you can like start treating them. That's kind of what it's like. These kids have found a solution in getting high. I'm often kind of dealing with more severe cases where there's like, daily use, where, now we can't really get through a day without this solution. And maybe there have been a lot of community-based support already. Like there's been outpatient therapy, there's been intensive outpatient, sometimes there's even like a day program. But it's also possible that I'm talking with a family that lives in a rural area, which I've always struggled with that word, rural, just for myself. There we go. And there aren't a lot of community-based supports. There may be an IOP that's 2 hours away. That's a 4-hour drive time for that parent 3 times a week, and they may have other kids. They may be a single parent. So it's like, it's always preferred, but it's not always possible for kids to have community-based support first. That's the best kind of intervention, right? But then you also have to consider that kids are the brain development that a kid is in a really susceptible place for substance abuse, meaning their prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped, where we get a lot more of our like decision making and judgment. So It's not the most logical version of our brain. And they're set up for impulse and kind of pleasure seeking a lot more than an adult fully formed brain. And so when a kid does have this, like, I've found a solution to getting high, you can't take it away from me. I'm good. No, thank you. Like, we can expect that they may be very defended about the behavior. But we also know that a brain that's being in the process of development, that's being exposed to a psychoactive substance every day, we just can't allow that to, it's not okay for that either, to just allow that. So there is a balance between, like, we can let kids be the expert on themselves, but we cannot always let them be the expert on what they need. And so there is this kind of fine balance between, kind of encouraging the solution that you think is best and giving them some agency and autonomy about their treatment process. So I think it's great when we can use interventions outside of residential facility. And then I also know that a lot of kids cannot really arrest their behavior without those kind of supports and measures in place. So a really unwilling kid or a really defended kid around their substance use that's still really protective of it isn't going to necessarily thrive in an outpatient program because they're still really holding on to this. And so Arch has some outpatient options. We have a virtual IOP program that treats everybody in our state, all genders. And then we also have an inpatient facility that treats males right now, but we also have one that's opening for females. And
we just closed today.
Oh, yay. That's so great. That makes me so happy. Yeah. And so, we have a process of determining when a kid is a good fit for us. And we have no problems saying when a kid is not. One of the things I really love about this organization is that, like, we know our lane. And, it doesn't matter what the call is that comes in. I'm going to connect that call with the right
Thank you for
resource.
Saying that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's just as successful call as ones that, kind of turn into someone in our care.
Yeah.
But if I can connect with people with what makes sense for them, then that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And that should be commonplace for every facility that has a call bank or has an admission staff, is that's the protocol, is that every call gets connected with help regardless, So you spend the time to hear their story.
One of the other things that I really love too, and this is just is that you answer the phone. Well,
I do.
Second.
Do. Yeah. Yes.
We just made that change, but you and another staff member, a newer staff member, Destiny, it's not a call bank in Timbuktu. It's actually our own folk.
It's us.
Boots on the ground, and it's important that we answer the phone. It's actually a sort of a long tradition of Cumberland Heights. It's a little bit of a mantra. We don't want a big decision tree. We don't want an automated system. We want real people answering the phone.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it gives us a unique position in determining those nuances too.
Well, like you said, so recently I have a really close friend of mine whom we both know, who I won't mention, who had who brought their son to Arch. And so, and me and this kid's dad are really close friends, and both are in recovery. In fact, we all grew up together in a lot of ways. And I had a front row seat to their experience even months before, years before, with this kid, and making a decision, kind of like wading through these, like, where might this behavior and this, maybe more importantly, the mindset in some ways be going. And when things escalated over a pretty condensed period of time, maybe even 6 months, watching their process of going through Arch, I just, I have a son, he's 8, so I can't imagine what it might be like having to make that decision, and I would want to really talk to somebody.
Yeah.
I would really want to, I would have a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
I'd really want to get to know the people that would be caring for my son or daughter.
Yeah.
For 90 to a few
Yeah.
months.
Yeah.
So
that's
I
our,
think that's
our
super
typical
important.
length of stay. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you, I think that's a good thing to talk about too, and if you don't mind, because I don't want it necessarily to be all about Arch, although it can
Yeah.
be. I don't want
Sure.
anybody to get resentful out there. But, talk about maybe what we do and how that's different from what we see around the rest of the country.
So, in going back to kind of like the healthy system is one that is adaptable, right? So one of the things that we have is a length of stay that's kind of subjective based on treatment progress. But we are also dealing with families who are, somewhat reliant on what insurance coverage looks like. And then, clinically speaking, not everybody needs the same length in treatment. And so we're kind of juggling all three of those interests of like, how is this kid doing with us and what does he clinically need, and versus like, what can this family afford? What's the best use of resources over the long haul? Because this is like hopefully the beginning of a journey. And so, yeah, we're looking at all of that. But what we're seeing, and, in creation of the Research Institute, Cumberland Heights, we are trying to get a better handle on the efficacy of our treatment. And what we are finding is that there's something significant that happens around 3 months of engaging someone in a process of recovery. The idea with Arch and our length of stay is that we want them with us long enough for them to really develop some new neural networks and some pathways around some of the concepts we're teaching them. We know that that process takes longer with the adolescent brain than it would with an adult. So a month-long treatment for an adolescent is not going to have the same impact as it would for an adult typically. So we also, the length of stay, we want it to be long enough for us to do some family systems work, because the idea is that we, are able to return a kid to their environment or to whatever's next, depending on their circumstances. But that parents are often also needing to engage in their own process of learning and about like, how do I support my kid and these challenges? And what am I possibly doing that contributes to the problem? Even the best parenting, we can be doing the very best we possibly can and still not necessarily have the right skill set for our kids and what they need. And we don't get to choose our system. We don't get to, as adolescents, you don't get to choose what parenting style your parents have, But when there is a mismatch, we can do some repair and some work with that family to better prepare that system to, kind of meet the needs of that kid.
So on average, how long does a kid stay with Arch, under the Arch umbrella?
So typically in the residential setting, we're seeing 3 to 4 months is the typical average. That's the length of time that the kids are taking to kind of work through the steps in the process, the kind of therapeutic work that we have lined out for them, and then the family system gets an intensive, and then some additional work as the kids kind of getting some practical application with the skill sets we're teaching, because we want to introduce them to concepts, but then we want them to be able to practically apply them. And so you just need a lot of repetition. And I know that sometimes they get burnt out because they feel like, I'm just doing the same thing. But that's the whole point. Mm-hmm. That is the whole point, is that you get repetition.
So give us some examples. Like, what are the skills? What is the repetition?
Yeah, sure. So there's communication skills. So like some of the adventure therapies that we utilize, like equine, for example, they do a lot of relationship work and communication work in those groups with those horses. We also, have our fly fishing course that incorporates a lot of 12-step concepts and recovery-based concepts into the actual fly fishing. And so the idea is by exposing them to and kind of giving them experiences for these therapeutic metaphors that we're helping create a better learning block for their brain. So instead of just kind of like telling them about relapse, we are doing a props group where they come in and they're actually kind of surrounded by drug paraphernalia, and they have to, kind of process what comes up for them somatically, and get familiar with that feeling and what it feels like to be around a beer can, and those kind of things. So those are some of the skill sets. Learning dysregulation skills, so like what happens to me when I'm under stress, or I don't get the response that I want, or I'm dealing with a tough personality and, I'm just losing it. So those are also some of the skills that we're helping them. It's like how to advocate for yourself, how to find your coping strategy that works. And
I would imagine some of that comes out in both milieu and group and individual work that happens, because every kid that comes there is doing sort of a triad, as well as the licensed school. So they might be trying to finish up their high school work at their pace. But from the outside looking in, since April 1st, 2020, when y'all moved to this campus where y'all are at now, which totally, by the way, fundamentally changed the program.
Yes.
In ways that maybe Dean expected. But it's been a beautiful thing to watch, because Arch now is absolutely, I say it like it's this mega thing, but it is fundamentally different than what it was here.
Yes.
Because of the time. We had the school, we were doing some experiential, we were doing group, we were doing an individual, but like you said, I really like the way that you said that block, establishing that block for them to experience the length of time needed to kind of begin to have not only the internal state, the process change, but that content where there's maybe a little bit of insight related to, starting to understand why we're doing this over and over again, and somebody's asking me to share and reflect how it felt to get called out by a friend or a peer,
right?
When otherwise that's just annoying. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, again, it's about understanding the developmental stage that they're in, because they're in a lot of identity formation and differentiation from family of origin, right? So to really develop an identity in recovery is crucial. If you are trying to go back into a system where you're going to go maybe to like regular high school again, and you're kind of known as that kid who had the drugs, and the kid who has really carved out some identity in recovery and kind of gotten to feel the impacts of, wow, I kind of really like who I am, and oh my gosh, I'm laughing and having fun with kids and no one's high. Like, just those kind of experiences they're the kids that come back into those systems and are able to say, no, man, I'm not about that anymore.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
You can say no.
Okay.
In terms of when the question comes.
Yeah.
When you reflect on your own experience in a adolescent program, what do you see as the differences between that experience as you described it and a typical Arch experience?
Okay, I have a really good metaphor for this, I think.
Okay, good, great.
It'd kind of be like if I pinned you down.
Okay.
So this was my experience as an adolescent. If I pinned you down and I elicited help from Ryan and
Shout out to Ryan.
shoved that water down your throat.
Wow.
Yes. Versus physically, yes. Well, yeah.
Well, right.
Metaphorically, but
well,
yes.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah.
It would be like, because water is good for you, right?
Oh, right.
Water is great for you.
Right.
But being pathologized or labeled or, you know what I mean? Like those aren't those aren't helpful, kind, engaging. Like there's no way to have a relationship with you if I physically force you to the ground and shove water down your throat.
Right.
Versus, hey, Nick, I really think you might benefit from being hydrated. And I got this water for you.
Take it or leave it.
I'm just going to invite you to participate in drinking some of this water if you want. So, I mean, it's like it's an invitational thing. It's, it's about relationship. And I think that what I didn't feel in my adolescent experiences was cared for by the staff. And my hope that, because I don't think even the best programs, I don't think are going to knock it out of the park for every single person that comes in their services. So there will be kids that are like, that wasn't really for me. But my hope is that even that kid still feels cared about by us and engaged in a caring relationship with a provider and has a positive experience of a therapeutic relationship at the very least.
Yeah.
So
I think the natural next place is to talk about a little bit of popular culture recently. I'm going to go where you want to go.
Okay.
Just FYI, right? In terms of these topics, because there are a series of publications, both documentary and print, over the last, for a long time, but really potent lightning rod materials over the last 2 years, maybe?
Yeah.
In particular, about the status of the teen, the adolescent behavioral health field in particular.
Yes.
So you tell me where you think that field is and its health and some of the problems that they're facing.
I'm very excited about where it is because I feel like
It's an interesting word.
So as a survivor of a troubled teen industry facility that kind of cropped up during the 90s, early 2000s, that kind of era, who now works in adolescent residential treatment, like I get
ironic?
So Paris Hilton, can I say that? Yeah. She had
Shout out Paris.
Yeah, shout out Paris. But she had this, she was doing some activism at a protest, and she had this poster that said, "The kids that you abuse today are the ones that will come after you tomorrow." And it just really, really loved that because it's so true. There's the kind of this reckoning that's happening as those of us who experience those kinds of awful programs aged up. We're adults. We have a voice and we have found it. But if your program is producing a community of people who call themselves survivors, then you never had a working treatment model. Despite the best intention that you could have possibly had, that is an opportunity to introspect and to get curious and to look inward and listen. So when it's kind of that impact over intent, like this is the impact. So regardless of your intent, put your intent aside and listen to the impact. And I think even further than that, those of us who are in residential treatment have a really great opportunity to look at our own programs and think about the culture that we are fostering. Like you said earlier, it's like definitely culture, like what feedback loops, what systems do we have to allow our kids who are the best, they're the best ones to give us feedback on how they feel treated by us, right? Like if you want to know how your staff are doing, ask the kids, ask the teens. And so, what kind of systems do we have? Like how do we respond to their criticisms? How do we empower them to give us criticisms?
It's a super interesting topic. Another one of my, I often reminisce, not to, poke fun at this word, but of somebody a long time ago telling me that all behavior makes sense if you understand the context in which it's developed.
Yeah.
So when I think about treatment programs, because I'm kind of a nerd on the history of psychology, in particular addictions treatment, and what has become today these residential rehabilitation programs for substance use disorder and beyond.
Right.
Because it's really if you take a look at it, it makes sense. And in adolescence, I wonder, one of the questions which I know less about than adults in addiction, but I wonder, like you said, these good intentioned ideas about, you know, what an adolescent needs is to be in the wilderness. You know what I'm saying? And like potentially, like I'm not an expert in any of that, but you know, and what an adolescent needs is, you know, because my perspective of these programs that have been highlighted is lockdown facilities with physical restraints, with, at times, with, like you said, this like culture of abuse, of not name calling, labeling and name calling. Pathologizing,
Yes.
that's the word I was searching for.
Labeling, yeah.
You know, a population that otherwise actually really needs, I do know a little bit about development, like a whole lot of support and being okay wherever it is that you are, and having another, almost like a therapeutic community, like have the community teach you, you know, through good and bad behavior, so to speak. I guess grow up in those communities is a really positive tool for change for an adolescent, not a series of adults sort of like forcing you to show up to something or believe a certain way.
Right.
And it seems to be like you said, a fundamental mistake that was made with some of that thought process.
Yes. Yeah. Well, those high control, coercive environments. And if you make anyone's freedom or feeling of freedom contingent upon them swallowing some ideology, then, you know, then that's what you get, is you get either people who comply and to survive, but they're just in survival mode. They're not, you know, that's, like I said, there's no collaborating on on treatment.
Here's an example. Because I was 20 when I went through this program, which, let's be clear, you knew me back then.
Yes.
I was an adolescent. The world called me an adult. Sure. Neat. But I was an adolescent. When I was in the residential program, because I did some programs afterwards, when I was in that first initial period of treatment, which I'd never experienced before, to be really honest, this is just my experience, I don't remember any of the quote work.
Yeah.
I remember the people.
Yep.
I remember how I felt in the groups.
Yes.
You know, I remember the smiles and the support that I felt that I had never felt before. Like in that way, you know what I'm talking about? Like in this culture of like, you know, we're going to love you till you can love yourself type of value. And that's what actually, if I reflect, I believe was really the hinge to take maybe the next suggestion. That was a suggestion.
Yeah.
Right?
Was feeling cared about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And wanting to be a part of that.
Yes.
I was like, oh, maybe there's something here for me that otherwise I might miss out on, and I want to check that out.
Yeah.
And it turned into a beautiful thing. And so when I see those kids in those programs either do in the Gaga Ball pit or equine therapy or a graduation up on the hill, you know, or in pottery or meeting with an individual therapist or what have you, like that's what I hope that they're experiencing, is a sense of being seen and being heard.
Yeah.
Because we don't have to agree with a resident, you know, about what they might be believing or some goal that they might have, but we can still support them.
Right.
We can still be a tool for them and certainly their parents and families.
Yep.
So is this affecting all of the field? How do you see it? Do you get questions about some of this press?
You know, I think mainly I'm talking to parents and providers, and they are, I mean, some of them are asking the right questions. Some of them don't know what questions to ask. Like I think it's important when you're looking at youth facilities about how communication is handled.
What do you mean?
Like if there's long stretches of time that you go without hearing from your kid, that's a big red flag. If phone calls are, because we have to provide 24-hour monitoring as in compliance with the state, right? So there has to be a staff member around, but that's not the same thing as monitoring a phone call and or threatening to end it if a teen is saying some criticism about your program. So for example, at Arch, like we're not going to end that phone call. They can give whatever criticisms to their parent that they want. That's their time to chat with their parent freely and as openly and honestly as they absolutely want. There's 2 opportunities to talk to your kid most weeks, but if there are months going by before you're able to have a call with your kid, or if it gets ended abruptly, those kind of things, like those are things to watch out for.
So is that the rule of thumb for us? I actually don't know. For calling, is it twice a week traditionally?
Yeah, well, for the first month, there's a family session that happens every week.
Gotcha.
And so in addition to that, there's a check-in call that they get every week.
I see. I gotcha.
Yeah, and then we also are trying to, because we're a 12-step facility, we're trying to expose them to, not everybody is going to go on to choose a 12-step solution, but we're going to expose them while they're here. Yeah, and so the we kind of show them what a sponsorship relationship looks like. So we have a kind of a phone tree that we use, and they can pick out somebody to work with, and they get access to that person whenever they want. So, and then even still, they can gain access to their phone. It takes a while to kind of earn that privilege.
The phone?
Yeah.
Which is another, because the phone comes with TikTok.
So many things.
Yeah.
But it's also a real great opportunity for us to like sit with them and go through their socials and go through their phone and kind of like what about this phone needs to be set up differently to help your recovery efforts. So I mean, that can be therapeutic too, is helping them kind of reestablish, like, I need to just create a whole new freaking profile, like, because this one was like all about my drug life. And can
we talk about technology?
Yeah.
How do y'all talk about it? Because it is we're in an interesting spot, and it's 15 years old.
I know. Yeah, it's like literally changing the way that we're evolving as a species. Yeah.
I mean, you and I are old enough that like it was just it was like a thing, but now it's like 5 or 6 different mediums and channels, and the depth to which kids in particular are growing up and interacting almost entirely. An example is like gaming.
Yes.
I had like a PS1. You remember? It's like that gray.
Oh, I wasn't even allowed to play video games.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, whatever it was, we had these things like, I remember in high school where like, if we wanted to play with our friends, we would have this like sleepover and like have to like physically plug in each console with like a Ethernet cord.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And set up like roll around big TVs back to back. And that's how you could like, and now you just go home on a Switch or a phone and you are in Fortnite.
Yes.
Like with people all over the world. So it's not just gaming, it's gambling.
Yeah.
It's pornography, certainly softcore porn on a myriad of these platforms. How do y'all talk about that with these young men, these young boys?
We're treating it alongside all of the other kind of obsessive compulsive behaviors. It's, kind of the same skill set. So if I have kind of like a craving or impulse, then it's like, that's information for me. Like, what are my feelings trying to tell me about what's going on? So it's like kind of trying to get them to reflect back inwards and introspect in those moments of like, okay, I'm craving this for a reason. Let me go and search myself for the reason. What's a more sustainable way to get that need met? And then let's go try and do that, and like, there's just, that takes a long time of, kind of repeating that process over and over again. But yeah, Dean says this all the time. Dean's our executive director, but he says this all the time. He's like, all behavior is useful. Like, so like what about that behavior is useful to me so that I can kind of find the path forward and find another way to meet that need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
COVID offered us different challenges with it for the adolescent population, which I spend a majority of my time around just because my office is also at that service facility. And we had to give people their phones. We didn't have to, in the sense that like there was a need for people to be able to call more frequently and connect digitally more frequently. And so we started to allow the use of cell phones within treatment. And gosh, I've heard from our clinical teams that they leveraged it as best they could and continued to do as a useful data information for certain folks, because they observed these interesting things where they had the time dedicated, 30 minutes to check out what was going on, check your email or whatever, and like different people walking in and out of the room.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're inundated with notification about a picture with this person and that,
Yes. Yeah.
and how challenging that can be to kind of feel your way through.
Yeah. Well, and to create our own limits and then stick to it. We're just, none of us are really great about that. Like, we're all kind of strung out on our phones, and it can be really tough for people to kind of turn off notifications.
It's not just me.
Yeah. It's not just you. But yeah, I really benefit from not having notifications or badges, like, and then there are also times where you put on that do not disturb. There's a reason why the phone, they're kind of trying to help us out with these new systems. And it's just such a good, easy feel good to press that button over and over again. Man. So it's hard.
Or to like get lost in a fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like a story, like reading a book or watching a show.
Yeah.
While you're eating peanut butter or whatever, whatever it might be. Which might be my story. It's fine. Can you talk about the girls program?
Yeah.
It's I'm super pumped.
Me too.
That this is we're going to be treating adolescent girls for the first time since...
I do not remember the year that...
It's 15 years at least.
Is it 15?
Well, no.
I think it's fewer than that.
Yeah, because we were
12, treating
10.
females on the main campus.
Maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That's right.
That sounds right.
Yeah. And we started in 85, and then there was a little bit of a break. So, so good news. We closed on the property.
Yes.
Today, I heard. And, of course, just starting work on a little bit of what's needed to make sure that that's set up appropriately, just operationally. But we're shooting for when to open this program, and what's your understanding of it, and who's welcome, and how are we going to prepare?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me everything you know.
Everything I know. So it'll be later this year, which is very nondescript, but that's all I have right now. But also what we noticed in treating before was that a lot of times the families of adolescent females were waiting to connect with residential treatment until the acuity was so high.
Really?
Yes.
Differently than they were boys?
Yes.
Okay. Why?
I think that I don't, I'm just as a female and imagining, I believe that there is some extra concern about safety when you're just dealing with females because we're just always a little more concerned about safety.
Yeah.
And so I think that for parents, the idea of kind of giving their son an experience and, oh yeah, cool, go do this thing and have an experience and, kind of brotherhood and, all that.
Scrape your knee.
Yeah. It's, exactly. Where it's just harder to kind of make that choice. And so,
can I just point out one thing?
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that the frequency of participating in our adult programs also matches that?
Yeah.
We treat way more cisgender men
Yes.
than we do women.
Yeah.
And I get that question all the time, like, why is that? What do you think? I'm like, I don't know, but it's an interesting phenomenon that at least regionally for us, actually I happen to know because I see a lot of national data, that exists everywhere. And I don't know what it is about our culture and how we treat women, how we think about women, how they think about themselves and their own behavioral health and their own ability. Some of it's an access issue, like a single mom cannot be away from children, right? And there are programs that will take your kids to, which is just
few and far between.
And also awesome, but few and far between for sure. I don't know what that is about. So it's just, that's very fascinating that y'all observe very similar interaction. That's starting early with protecting our women.
Yes.
Or that's maybe the perception, right? Let's protect them.
That's the perception. Absolutely. So we're trying to design a program that takes that into account. The fact that our calls from parents are probably going to be a higher acuity. So the program's going to be smaller. It'll be like an 8 to 10 bed facility. It'll have more clinical programming to meet the needs of more behaviors like self-harm or disordered eating, because we're kind of seeing that when an adolescent has kind of found that kind of regular habit with substance use, they're usually always accompanied by some other behaviors as well, at a higher rate than our cisgender males.
Yeah. That's good to hear. I'm excited. I know we're going to spend some time together in about a month, or at least our marketing team is going to come over, and the way that I presented it, to Dean is sort of like blanks, like butcher paper on the wall. Like, you tell us how, just in terms of our support of the new section of the website and materials that tell the story of that program. We're just going to do a lot of listening, and I'm super pumped about that, and eager to learn how y'all envision supporting those families and those girls, because it'll be a challenge. But everybody that I've told about it has reacted the same way. Usually some iteration of thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a real need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many calls do you think you get a year for girls?
Oh gosh, I could not do that math.
Like 100?
Easily.
Wow.
Yeah, easily. And they're along the spectrum of needs. So, some of those do end up going into our outpatient services.
Right.
And then some of them I, connect with outpatient therapists or, do
How do most people
assessments.
hear about Arch?
It's a pretty wide range of, website or kind of know, like if they're local, they kind of known about Cumberland Heights for years. But we also, work with other facilities and pediatricians and psych providers that are working with adolescents, other outpatient programs when they have a kid who's in their care who is not being able to abstain and is still at risk, and those kind of things. And then hospitals, like, unfortunately, I frequently get calls from the ER because, we're dealing with substance use. And so we have a lot of overdoses. And then also we're seeing a real huge increase in cannabis-induced psychosis, which is kind of with some of the higher potent THC products. Just a little more severity around that drug too.
Yeah. right, last question for today.
Sure.
If you could change one thing about Cumberland Heights, what would it be?
Oh my goodness.
Just let it rip.
Man. To my real honest answer.
Yeah, I love it.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so
if you feel comfortable, if you feel safe, because this is a podcast, we could edit it out.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, like, I want us to be as friendly as possible to all walks of life. And that means theists, non-theists, cisgender, transgender individuals. Like, I want us to be, to just have the most adaptability around meeting people where they are. And I think that there's been so many wonderful things that I have seen come about. Our CEO is just one of my favorite people in that regard, like how, like his commitment to that too. So I think most of the things I want to see change are along that vein of like, how can we just blow through, like, how can we always be using language that is the most invitational, that's the most inclusive, that is caring and empathetic, that, yeah. And that I think would translate into just like lots of staff trainings and, you know, that kind of thing. But I would love that. I would love that.
That's a great answer. It's copy, it's pictures, sometimes it's physical space, it's training, and you know, those changes represent the people in our communities.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that our programs are reflexive to the needs of the community that's in front of us, no matter how somebody identifies, all around celebrating a common problem,
Right.
and a common set of tools and solutions that our history and alumni and staff all believe in, which we've talked a lot about that it kind of manifests in art. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you for being here on a Friday.
You're
I love you a
welcome.
lot. By the way, for those that don't know, we've known each other a long time.
Yes.
So I alluded to it, but I have much respect for you and the work that you've done, and happy that you
Same.
found a good home.
Yes.
Because you're good at your job.
Thank you.
You know, and I see I see the effort that goes into the space and the time that you all give on the front end for each family, and I think it really does matter.
Yeah.
So I hope that you feel that, you know, just from this place.
Yeah.
So thank you once again.
You are welcome.
See you next time.
Thanks for having me on.